Hey, Billy.
Ash.
Let's start it off by you giving us a quick testimony of how you came to know the Lord.
All right, well, God saved me when I was 21 years old. I remember it was a strange time in my life. It was a time where it was a time when I realized that there was really nothing that this life had to offer me. Nothing that I could get as far as satisfaction goes, as far as contentment goes, or joy, and I had tried everything that there is under the sun. And by this time I was involved in drug use and sexual immorality, and I think before that, anything you could think of, I had probably tried it. And I was even getting involved in different societies, looking for purpose and looking for meaning, looking for something that a place where I could fit in, and even growing orchids wasn't doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I guess my life started falling apart, and my wife drugged me to a church, which is something I really didn't want to do. And when that guy was preaching, he said something to me that awoke in my conscience. And to this day, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something that made me do some introspection and see what it was that I was doing. I never asked myself to question, is the things that I do offensive to God? Is there, does he even care how I live? And as I started thinking about that, I realized, a lot of things that I do is very much offensive to God. And as I look back on my sexual immorality and on my drug use and on my constant searching for satisfaction, and when I realized that I was doing all that stuff in opposition to him, I realized I was really in a terrible position. And so I thought, well, I can fix myself. It'll be all right. I realized my life's bad and I've offended God, so I'm just gonna clean my life up. And so I quit some drug use and sexual immorality and those things. I always kind of put that stuff aside, but it never got rid of my guilty conscience. It never got rid of this weight of this sin that I was carrying around with me, and I realized that was my problem the entire time. And right around that time, I decided to read the Bible, and I decided to look into religion and see what was so great about Christianity, since so many people say they're Christians. And in the process there, God, He showed me through the scriptures that showed me of the love that he has and the forgiveness that he has, and how he sent his son into the world to save sinners. And the more I read and the more I thought about that, the more I was convinced that I needed to have Jesus in my life. And so he saved me about right in that time.
Wow, that's deep. So I guess after you became a Christian, how did you learn how to engage your beliefs practically? Like how did you change those habits and things that you did to something more godly? Like how did you make that transition from such a different life to now?
I think Paul says, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that was really where a lot of the transformation happened, was in the renewing of my mind. And as I sit there and studied the scriptures and studied what it is that God has revealed to this world through his son and through his and in the Bible and through creation, as I started seeing those things, my worldview started to change. And it wasn't just that I saw drug use or sexual immorality as something that is a no-no, but I saw the reason why it was wrong. Mm-hmm. And I saw the reason why it was offensive. And when I started seeing why things were the way they were, it kind of made things a little bit different as far as what I wanted. And then I guess, I don't know, does that answer the question?
Yeah,
I'm trying to think to add more to it, but I could, but I don't want to.
No, I think that answered it. I'm curious, what's it like to be a young pastor in a church that's already established? What's it like to come in and be so much younger than a lot of the congregation? How did that work out for you?
My age never really played a role in my mind, because I oftentimes forget how old that I am. It's hard for me to keep track of time. To me, just days are all just, it's one moment as I live it all out, and it's hard for me to remember exactly when things happen, just because time's not really something I think of as far as age goes. But it is, it was strange coming into a church that's already established, and then being ordained as a pastor, and because it was, people had to trust me. They had to know who I was, and I'm the kind of person who's naturally introverted and who's naturally not all that outgoing. And so it took a while for people to really see where my heart was, and to see what it was that God was doing with me, and the calling that he had called me to. And once once all those things were demonstrated and manifested to the congregation, they realized that God has called me into the ministry, and they seem to be happy to recognize that. And that was the hardest thing, I think, was being transparent so that people could see my heart and see that I love them and see that I really desire for their relationship with Christ to grow. And once, that was the hardest part. But once that happened, it seemed like it, now that almost, to me, it seems like it comes natural. Expressing that to people.
I think so too. Well, you're young now. What are you, 26? 28, wow, you're old. But you will get older. And so now I'm wondering, when you get super old and crusty and about to die, what would you want to be your last sermon?
Oh man, you had to ask me the last sermon question.
I did.
That's, I thought a lot about that. I mean, it would depend on who I was preaching to.
To the church.
But then it's to the church. And there's only one thing that I really want the church to know, and that is that God sent his son into the world to die for their sins, and that through Christ and only through Christ alone can they be reconciled to God, and only through Christ alone can they find any kind of comfort or satisfaction or consolation in this world. And I would want them to be comforted knowing that Jesus Christ has come into the world to reconcile them to God, and I want them to have all the comfort and all the protection and all the confidence that knowing that you have a Savior, knowing that in this world would bring. Just there's really not a mountain that's too big once you realize that Jesus Christ is not just your King and not just your Savior, but he's also your big brother. He's also your husband. He's everything that we have. He's everything, period. And once we can realize that and really comprehend that, it just transforms the world around us. It almost makes life seem simple after all of that. And that's what I would want everyone to really know.
Yeah. Well, I asked the other two to share the gospel, but I think it's interesting how the gospel is for the church and for the lost. And in your last sermon, I think that's what you would do, is share the gospel. That's what you just did.
Yeah.
So I think you answered that too.
Well, how about that?
You did. And
But is
probably
it-
wasn't under 30 seconds though.
No,
Probably wasn't.
It was. The
Oh, was
actual,
it?
the gist of it was.
It was.
We might do it under 30 seconds. I don't
You
know.
just did it.
But it is interesting that when you do read through the, like when you read Paul and when you read Peter, you see that they're constantly reminding believers of the gospel. The gospel is not something for, not just something for unbelievers. And once you become a Christian, you graduate from the gospel and move on to bigger things like eschatology and stuff that people like to really focus on. But really, the gospel is the heart of Christianity, and it's the heart of Christian growth, and it's the heart of Christian maturity. And that the more we focus on the gospel and the more we interpret our lives through the gospel lens, the stronger we become as Christians. It's actually something that we never ever graduate from, and that's what's going to make heaven so glorious, is that the gospel is going to be there in all of its colors, and we can dwell on it for all of eternity.
Oh, I can't think of a better way to end it.
How about that?
Thank you both.